Hello, officer? Yes, I'd like to report a joke, please. What exactly is hate speech? Let me give you a quick example. So this guy, for making this very stupid, unfunny video, was prosecuted by the British authorities for hate speech. So that's one example of what is considered hate speech. So you might have read the title of the video and thought, I thought we were talking about hate speech. You're talking about jokes. Well, yeah, so a joke is just something absurd, something that we're not to take seriously, whereas genuine hate speech is something absurd, something we should not take seriously. I don't really see the difference. To further define, at least from a legal perspective, what hate speech is. So first of all, let's look at Australian federal legislation that defines hate speech. It's defined as offensive behaviour because of race, colour, or national or ethnic origin. It is unlawful for a person to do an act otherwise than in private if A. The act is reasonably likely in all circumstances to offend, insult, humiliate, or intimidate another person or a group of people, and B. The act is done because of the race, colour, or national or ethnic origin of the person or some or all of the people in the group. Number 2. For the purposes of subsection 1, the act is taken not to be done in private if it causes words, sounds, or images or writing to be communicated to the public, or B. Is done in a public place, or C. Is done in the sight or hearing of people who are in a public place. So that's the Australian definition of hate speech, encompassed in hate crime or hate speech. Fortunately, in Australia, there's very few, actually I don't think I know of any, very few prosecutions of hate speech. Now in Britain, it's a different story. They're more inclined to actually prosecute people for this stuff, as you saw in the example at the top of the video. So let's look at some British examples of what they think hate speech is. So in the United Kingdom, the law recognises 5 types of hate crime on the basis of, remember hate crime and hate speech are intertwined here. So race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, and transgender identity. Any crime can be prosecuted as a hate crime if the offender has either demonstrated hostility based on race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or transgender identity, or being motivated by hostility based on race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, and transgender identity. Someone can be a victim of more than one type of hate crime. These crimes are covered by legislation, Crime and Disorder Act of 1998 and Section 66 of the Sentencing Act 2020, which allows prosecutors to apply for an uplift in sentence. For those convicted of a hate crime, the police and the CPS have agreed the following definition for identifying and flagging hate crime. Any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on the person's disability or perceived disability, race or perceived race, or religion or perceived religion, or sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation, or transgender identity or perceived transgender identity. So you see 2 examples of attempts to codify exactly what a hate crime or what hate speech is. And I don't know if it strikes you as it strikes me. It seems very broad. It seems that if most of us are honest, most of us have probably made comments like this, just unintentionally in the past, of black humor, which I'm not saying is okay, but what I'm saying is, like, if that is allowed to be a crime, then most of the population would be in jail. What strikes me as more salient than that is that you could just say these things and it's a crime without a victim. So with the 2 definitions, the first one, the Australian definition, the British definition, they're very similar in what they say. But in terms of how they're applied, in Australia, they're not so inclined to prosecute those type of crimes, where in Britain, it's more common for these crimes to be prosecuted. That shows some of the arbitrary nature of this stuff. It is what you think it is, if the definitions of what hate speech is broad. Then you notice the key word in both of these definitions of hate speech is offended. If someone is offended, then it's deemed to be hate speech. And who's to say what is offensive, and who's to say that what standards we apply? I mean, it just seems that we are allowing the most sensitive among us to determine what is and what is not hate speech. And they can just say, I'm offended, and they present themselves as a victim. So in my opinion, that does not in actuality constitute a victim. the point I'm making here is that any crime, whether it's this crime or any other crime, it's important that the prosecution can demonstrate that there is a victim to this crime, that the person that's done the crime has done some harm, real harm, not just saying that they're offended, but real harm to somebody. So to conclude that point, that is my main criticism of these criminal codes. Now you might say, well, you're arguing against hate speech. There's no such thing as hate speech in your view. Well, not exactly. I mean, there are cases where it can be demonstrated that the hate speech has a victim, and that victim has suffered real harm, not perceived harm or just being offended, but real harm has been done. So let me show you an example of what I would say is a real case of hate speech.
Back in the summer of 2015, they weren't nearly as tearful. They were part of this group of Confederate flag supporters in pickup trucks who spent 2 days across 2 counties in the Atlanta suburbs threatening black families and calling them racial slurs.
They're pulling rifles out on 5 trucks with white guys with rebel flags.
This family was throwing a birthday party for a young child and called the police.
They got knives and guns, yes.
All of this happened after South Carolina removed its Confederate battle flag from the State House.
That is not me. That is not me. That's not him.
So in this instance, we see that in a group of what we call a group of idiots rode in their pickup trucks with a Confederate flag, disrupting a child's birthday party with their hateful crap. So in my view, that is a legitimate case of hate speech where there is a victim. They disrupted and intimidated these people out of sheer malice, out of sheer racism. This is a genuine case of racism. Now, these individuals that perpetrated this crime, they were prosecuted, but they weren't prosecuted for hate speech. They were prosecuted for other crimes unrelated to hate speech. Because in the United States, there's no such thing as hate speech. From a legal point of view, the First Amendment ensures that nobody can be prosecuted for hate speech, and that it's very difficult to make hate speech legislation. So in summary, I'm not saying that there should not be laws against hate speech, but I'm just saying that in countries like Australia or Britain, certainly in the EU, I haven't even gotten into that, the definitions are too broad that just about anybody at some stage of their life could be prosecuted with these crimes for, as I began with, a joke. I mean, and the jokes, they're stupid jokes, they're not funny jokes. I'm not trying to defend them. They don't offer any value to public discourse, but I mean, we've all done stupid things. I mean, if I was prosecuted for a very stupid thing I've done, I'd have a life sentence. So in conclusion, that these laws are too vague, that they should be written with a victim in mind, that if there is a genuine victim of a hate crime or hate speech, then the perpetrators of that speech should be prosecuted. My name is John Alexander. Thank you very much for watching.